Good afternoon, folks. My name is Gary. I hope you're doing well today, and welcome back to the show. Now, I mentioned this in the first episode of the channel, but I've already done a fair bit of work to this Ranchero before making any videos on it for the channel. Ahead of time though, I did record a lot of that work, and one of the things I wanted to share with you all was the process by which I removed the bed liner out of this vehicle. Now, spray and bed liners are notoriously bad for older cars and usually are hiding things, so I wanted to rip this out just to see exactly how bad the rust or the damage was underneath it, so I figured I'd make a step-by-step process, or at least show you the way that I got the bed liner out of this vehicle. Without further ado, I will roll back that footage I had from a few months ago and I'll show you exactly how I took care of that.
Now, I don't know how old this bed liner was, but just in general, this stuff is bad news for old vehicles. Being that this car's over 50 years old, it's very likely this bed liner was put on sometime in the last 20 years, which is well after this vehicle's already been used and abused, and the bed was probably all scratched and dinged up, meaning there were plenty of spots for open, bare metal to get rusted. This means that years down the road, you could have a rust bomb waiting to go off and you wouldn't even know it until you drop something heavy in the bed and it goes right through. While it was quite time consuming to do, I found that it was easy enough with cheap tools to get all this old bed liner peeled away. A simple razor blade, a heat gun, a putty knife, a chisel, and a hammer were basically all that was necessary. By heating up the bed liner with the heat gun, I was able to get it soft enough that I could get some long slices through it with a blade and then just peeled it back like an orange. The biggest caution I can give you with the heat gun trick is that you don't want to get this bed liner too hot, otherwise it'll start smoking and there is no way that those chemicals are good for you. Some spots were a bit stickier than others, so occasionally I did have to get it to the point of smoking just to make it a little easier to yoink off, but try to avoid it as much as possible. Some spots were easier than others, likely because the paint underneath it was coming off of the metal instead of the bed liner coming off of the paint. As I mentioned in the first video for the channel, this Ranchero has been painted no less than 3 different times over the course of its life, as there was plenty of red, blue, and white underneath this bed liner when I pulled it up. The entirety of the bed liner removal was done over the course of about 3 or 4 hours if I remember correctly, so definitely not a fast job, but it worked pretty fine with the tools that I had available to me. Once I had the liner removed, I was finally able to open up the access panel in the middle of the bed. You have to get to this to be able to reach the top shock mounts, and it also let me check for additional rust locations that could have started up over the years. This is likely going to be an open can of worms, so to speak, because someone in the past 50 years decided to spray a bunch of expanding foam down in there, which I can almost guarantee means that there was water getting in there, which means there is probably some rust to deal with in my future. Oh boy. The bed itself also had quite a bit of surface rust, and a problem spot in the driver's side corner of where the bed meets the cab area. Up by the cab at the front of the bed of the Ranchero are 2 holes, which have tubes that run through the quarter panels down out beneath each side of the rocker panels. These are meant to be a drain off for water when it rains when it gets in your bed, otherwise you'd have a bunch of water just sloshing around back there and rusting it out. Of course, whoever decided to spray the bed liner also covered both of these holes up, so several pinholes developed in the driver's corner. To remediate this for now, I grinded off as much of the surface rust and bare metal as I could, and then used some 20 gauge steel that I curved roughly into the shape of the corner of the bed and stuck it on there with a crap load of JB Weld. A cheap welder is likely in my future depending on how much and where there happens to be any further rust, but for the moment this corner just had one little small problem spot. For the rest of the bed surface, I decided to buy a couple different tools to try out. I figured some flap wheels would work pretty well for an angle grinder, so I bought a couple of cheap 60 grits from Harbor Freight just to try it out. They definitely worked quite nicely, taking off the rust and paint very effortlessly. Being that these were like $2.50 each, the flap wheels didn't last very long, so if I were to do this sort of work again, I'd likely splurge and buy some higher quality ones other than these cheapo Warrior brand things that Harbor Freight offers, but that's kind of what they're known for and I just wanted to give it a shot. I also decided to try out one of those polycarbide abrasive wheels, though they didn't have any in the correct arbor size for my angle grinder, so I ended up having to get one for my drill. This too worked pretty decent, and the plus side is that it wouldn't remove as much surface metal as the flap wheels could. It didn't hold up that well regarding longevity, but its shape let me get into spots where the angle grinder just couldn't reach very well. I also tried some wire wheels and other things like that on the drill, but none of them were really worth the effort, and the flap wheels really carried the day in regards to surface rust and paint removal. For a temporary coating, I put on some Rust-Oleum Reform and Seal, which is a rubberized coating. It supposedly offers chemical resistance and whatever for sealing and prevention of rust, So I figured at least until I get ready to fix the bed for real, that this would be a sufficient coating so I don't have to worry about any random rainstorm or snow appearing out of nowhere and rusting the crap out of it all over again. It spreads pretty easily with a roller, and the finish is good enough for me, especially since the whole car is in primer at this point anyhow, so whatever. The only place I haven't painted yet is the tailgate, as there is a bit of rust that I need to grind off and fill in. Thankfully, it seems in good enough condition that I don't need to hunt down an entirely new tailgate, as those can be very tricky to find if they're not all banged up or rusted out too. Now, the biggest downside to this bed is that it has seen its fair share of abuse and use over the past several decades, so there are tons of dents and dings and all this other stuff wrong with it. Taking the bed liner off just made all of these issues even more apparent, which means I'm likely going to put another coating of the stuff on there in the future, though I will do it in separate pieces so that way I can remove that rear access panel still. Not sure if I'll bother tinting the bed liner to match whatever I paint the car, or if I'll just leave it the standard black. I haven't decided yet. Anyways folks, I hope this chunk of the repair process gives you some good pointers on getting old bed liner off of an older vehicle, and if you don't care if the paint underneath gets damaged. Likely a lot of paint is going to get peeled off when you yoink a liner out anyways, especially if it's an older paint job underneath. I've got plenty more work in store on this vehicle, so feel free to subscribe to the channel so you get notifications of any time I put a video up. Thanks for stopping by folks, and have a great day.